You'd think a man could retire in peace on the same soil his granddaddy used to raise cattle and fight off coyotes. But no, in modern America, the real predator wears pastel golf shirts and calls herself the president of the Homeowners Association. Her name's Karen. Of course it is. One crisp morning, I opened a certified letter that looked more like a ransom note than a bill. Outstanding dues, $250,000. Failure to comply will result in legal action. I thought it was a scam. Some spammer from Nigeria, maybe. But no, it was real. Real official. Real aggressive. Real stupid. See, my family's ranch, a 160-acre spread just outside a planned development called Evergreen Valley Estates, was never part of any HOA. Never signed anything. Never agreed to any community standards. Hell, my mailbox doesn't even face their cul-de-sac. But somehow their board had voted, unanimously how convenient, to annex my land into the HOA jurisdiction, citing some obscure clause about shared entryways and visual cohesion. Translation? They didn't like my red barn because it clashed with the community's aesthetic. Newsflash, Karen. The community didn't exist when this barn was built in 1901. And here's where it gets good. I started digging through the old property maps, county records, and surveyor files my grandfather left behind in a fireproof box labeled, "For when the lawyers come." And wouldn't you know it, Evergreen Valley Estates was not only wrong about the HOA dues, they were built at least 50 feet into my property line. That's right. These self-righteous HOA warriors had paved sidewalks, built fences, even constructed a whole dog park on land they didn't own. And now they wanted to charge me for not mowing it? They messed with the wrong rancher. This is the story of how one man, a quiet rancher with a sharp memory and sharper legal instincts, took on an out-of-control HOA and exposed just how deep their arrogance and incompetence ran. As Karen and her board pushed harder with fines, legal threats, and even tried to block access to my own pasture road, I stayed patient, building my case. What they didn't know was that I'd once worked in the county recorder's office, and I kept copies, all of them. And when I brought those documents to the community meeting, in front of all their smug neighbors, well, let's just say it was the last time Karen banged that little HOA gavel with confidence. Justice might be slow, but it rides a big truck and carries property deeds. Stay tuned. The best part's yet to come. I didn't start this war. All I wanted was peace, quiet, and maybe a couple of chickens. But the moment Karen saw me repaint the barn, she must have smelled fresh blood, because that same week, I got my first violation notice. Unauthorized exterior color, barn must be painted neutral tones per Section 4C of HOA aesthetic guidelines. Now, mind you, the barn is 200 feet from their property line, and technically speaking, they had no right to dictate anything. But that didn't stop the notices, or the fines, or the HOA newsletter calling me non-compliant. It only got worse from there. My grandfather, Elias Cooper, bought this land in 1946 with a handshake and $3,500 in war bonds. Over the years, the ranch became a local fixture. Cattle, apples, a little honey production, and plenty of summer jobs for local kids. When he passed, the property came to me, his only grandson. I left the city, left a job at the county records office, funny enough, and came back to rebuild. Paint the fences, grow a little food, live simply. But by then, Evergreen Valley Estates had sprung up like mold on white bread. One of those master-planned communities with yoga gazebos and speed bumps every 10 feet. The kind of place where people decorate their mailboxes for every minor holiday and file noise complaints if a cricket chirps too loud. Still, I figured, they stay on their side, I'll stay on mine. I was wrong. It started with small stuff. One day I planted a young red maple tree near the fence line. It's my favorite tree. Grandpa planted one like it years ago. 3 days later, a bright yellow tag on the tree. This tree must be removed. It violates HOA setback requirements. Setback requirements? I wasn't in the HOA. But Karen claimed the newly paved walking trail, which they built without asking, connected our communities. So technically, I was now part of theirs. They fined me $250 for the tree and another $500 for refusing to comply. When I called the county, They confirmed no record of annexation. So I marched into the next HOA board meeting, ready to clear things up. But here's what I walked into. A room full of folding chairs, lemonade, and passive aggression Karen at the front with a PowerPoint titled Community Cohesion, Why the Cooper Ranch Needs Oversight, and a motion to retroactively vote me into the HOA because the community deserves consistency. And the vote? 5-0. All board members, all Karen's friends. I was furious, sure, but I didn't yell, I didn't storm out. I did what Granddad taught me. When folks play dirty, you don't dig a bigger hole, you dig through the facts. So I started pulling old documents. I went into the crawl space, grabbed the waterproof lockbox marked Deeds plus Dirt, and inside was gold. Original survey maps, sign and boundary documents from 1946, a letter from the county confirming that our land extended 100 feet past the current fence line, the same area now home to Evergreen's community gardens and dog park. I cross-checked that with the county GIS system. Their development built a retention pond, 4 walking paths, 10 rear yards, and part of their community clubhouse, all on my grandfather's land. And they were billing me for not mowing it? Karen didn't like that I was asking questions. Suddenly, I was getting visits from compliance officers every other day. One morning, I woke up to a notice on my door. Due to persistent violations and unpaid fines, access to Evergreen Valley amenities will be revoked. Amenity access? I never used their tennis courts or their damn pickleball court. I had a horse barn, for crying out loud. Then came the letter that tipped the scale. HOA will seek reimbursement for community landscaping expenses over the past 5 years, totaling $250,000. Payment expected within 30 days. That's when I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a land grab, a pressure campaign, an attempt to bankrupt me off land I rightfully owned. At first, none of the residents said a word. Karen was too loud, too organized, too scary. But small things started to happen. A man named Rick, ex-Air Force, lived 2 houses down from the clubhouse, stopped by to return a tool and whispered, "They shouldn't be doing this to you." A woman named Darlene slipped a note in my mailbox. "They used to be reasonable. Now it's just Karen's show. You're not the only one tired of it." And one night I saw a younger couple quietly measuring their backyard fence with a flashlight. I realized I wasn't the only one with land questions. I was just the only one willing to make noise about it. Here's what Karen and her board didn't know. Remember how I worked at the county recorder's office? I was there when Evergreen Valley Estates submitted their initial build plans, and I still had copies of the original submissions. I knew the signatures. I knew what they left out. I knew where the bodies were buried. Metaphorically, of course. But I wasn't going to the police yet. No, I had something better planned. You'd think once I started pushing back, Karen might back off. You know, like a normal person confronted with facts, maps, and legal documents. But not Karen. Karen doubled down like a blackjack addict who just mortgaged her cat. It started with a letter, again, this time from the county. This property has been reported for unpermitted agricultural use within a residential adjacent buffer zone. An inspection will be conducted. Unpermitted agricultural use? I've got 3 goats, a garden patch, and 2 apple trees. That's not exactly Monsanto. But sure enough, a county inspector showed up, clipboard in hand, looking sheepish. "I'm sorry, Mr. Cooper," he said. "We got a formal complaint. Said your compost pile was a health hazard." Ah, of course. Karen had reported me to the county, probably with a strongly worded letter written in 14-point Comic Sans. I gave the inspector a glass of iced tea and a full tour. He found nothing. But I knew this wasn't the end. 2 days later, I go out to water my tomatoes. Twist the spigot. Nothing. Check the horse trough. Bone dry. I follow the water line down toward the back fence. And guess what I find? A brand new padlock on the valve gate. A sign zip-tied to the post. Private, HOA access only. Trespassers will be prosecuted. That water line had been there since 1959. It runs from an underground spring on my land through what is now their green belt and continues to service my barn, my well house, and my garden. Karen had called a board meeting, declared the valve community property, and had one of her sons-in-law, a retired plumber with a temper and no license, Shut it off. Now, I had backup tanks. I'm not a fool, but I also had documents. And shutting off someone's water? Oh, honey, that's not a citation. That's a felony in this state. But I didn't call the sheriff. Not yet. That weekend, the HOA newsletter arrived in mailboxes. Front page headline, Cooper Ranch refuses community access, declares hostility toward neighbors. It accused me of intentional noise disturbances from hammering a fence post, verbally intimidating volunteers. I asked someone to get off my property, and my favorite, spreading misinformation about HOA land rights. They even said I was planning to sue the entire neighborhood. I wasn't, not yet, but thanks for the idea. I knew Karen's smear campaign was for show. She was losing control, and she knew it. So she went loud, and the louder she got, the more her neighbors started whispering. One night, Rick, the ex-Air Force guy from earlier, showed up at my door with a USB stick. You didn't get this from me, he said, but you might want to look at the HOA minutes from last April. On that USB, a recording from an internal HOA meeting. Karen saying, and I quote, "The Cooper Ranch needs to be brought in line. If he won't join willingly, we make it difficult. Legally, financially, socially. Squeeze until he either sells or sues." There it was, in her own voice. That wasn't governance, that was a shakedown. I spent the next week like a man possessed, pouring through plat maps, utility schematics, past HOA meeting notes, thanks to a sympathetic board member who accidentally CC'd me, and hours of old emails looking for patterns. Turns out, the HOA never properly filed their expansion with the county. The walking path was technically an easement, but never surveyed. And most damning, the water valve Karen locked. It was listed in a 1974 municipal file as agricultural line with protected right-of-way. In other words, I had every legal right to that water, and she tampered with it. The kicker came one night around 10:45 p.m. Blue lights outside, sirens. I step outside and see 2 squad cars and Karen, in her robe and slippers, crying to an officer. "She threatened me," she yells. "He said he'd burn it all down. He hates us." I stood there in sweatpants and flip-flops, holding a glass of milk. The officer turns to me. "Sir, did you threaten this woman?" "No," I said, "but I do plan to take her to court." Turns out she'd called in a false emergency, claimed she overheard me plotting revenge while walking past my open window. Except my windows were closed, and I have security footage to prove it. By the next HOA meeting, half the chairs were empty. The other half were filled with tired faces. People who used to nod when Karen spoke, now just stared at the floor. When she called the meeting to order, a man in the back raised his hand. "Before we talk about hedge heights again, can we discuss why we're being sued?" Karen turned white. See, the county had opened an official investigation into the HOA's boundaries and conduct. Because of me? Sure, but also because Rick and 3 other homeowners had filed formal complaints. And when that recording came out, well, it wasn't just her water valve that got shut off. If you've ever been to a town hall meeting in a small town, you know the vibe. Lukewarm coffee, folding chairs that squeak too much, retired men in baseball caps who don't trust anyone under 60, and a whole lot of polite Midwestern rage simmering just under the surface. But this meeting? Oh, this one was different. This one had a projector, a flash drive, and a woman named Karen holding onto her HOA gavel like it was a life preserver. After Karen called the cops on me for threatening behavior, aka watering my tomatoes at 10 p.m., I knew it was time to go public. So I formally requested a citizen's speaking slot at the next Evergreen Valley Estates HOA General Assembly, which, due to increased community tension, had been moved to the town's municipal building instead of the usual clubhouse. Apparently, even HOA drama has a dress code. I showed up early, not to be polite, but to make sure the tech worked. I brought my grandfather's original land deed, certified boundary maps from the county recorder's office, a recording of Karen's board meeting where she planned to squeeze me out, and a full blown-up aerial photo showing exactly which HOA properties were sitting on my land. And just in case that didn't do it, I had a certified letter from my lawyer delivered to the board that morning, announcing my intent to file suit for trespassing, utility interference, and defamation. Let's just say Karen wasn't exactly thrilled to see me. They gave me 3 minutes. I used 6. I started with a photo of my grandfather, Elias, holding me on the porch of the old ranch house in 1979. Then I flipped to a modern drone shot of the Evergreen Valley Community Garden, built directly on the portion of land the deed marked as Cooper Family Parcel Number 3, not for transfer. Then the map overlays. Then the signed, time-stamped submission from the 2004 HOA development proposal, missing the legal requirement for cross-boundary surveys. Finally, I played the recording, Karen's voice, cool and smug. We make it difficult, legally, financially, socially, squeeze until he either sells or sues. You could hear a pin drop, and then a cough from the back, and then a woman named Darlene stood up, crossed her arms and said, "I think we owe Mr. Cooper an apology." Karen, to her credit, tried to maintain composure, but her face was redder than a stop sign in July. She stood, clutching a folder like it was a Bible, and started talking fast. "Mr. Cooper is manipulating old data. Those documents were superseded, and the walking trail was approved, and we had a right to vote on the annexation." I raised my hand. Permission to respond? The room, clearly not on her side anymore, murmured in approval. I said, "That vote, 5 board members, all hand-picked, no resident ballots, no public notice. You don't get to vote on someone else's property." Boom! Someone clapped. Then another. Karen's gavel hit the table. "Order! Order! These are unsubstantiated accusations." Then Rick, ex-Air Force, community watchdog, certified American badass, stood up with a folder of his own. "Actually," he said, "they're all substantiated. I've got copies too." Within minutes, it was a free-for-all, residents demanding explanations, receipts, access to meeting minutes they'd never seen before. 2 other board members resigned on the spot, blaming Karen for pushing things too far. One guy, the treasurer, looked like he was about to puke. He kept muttering something about not knowing the land was in dispute. And then the final blow, the city liaison, a soft-spoken clerk from the county zoning office, stood up and said, "We've reviewed Mr. Cooper's documentation. Based on this evidence, a formal boundary review is now pending, and if confirmed, several structures may indeed be encroaching on private land." The entire left row of the room, the ones who lived in the Garden View cul-de-sac, visibly panicked. One woman whispered, "Does this mean my sunroom is illegal?" Funny thing about truth, once it's out, it moves fast. Over the next few weeks, the local paper ran a story. HOA overreach sparks land dispute in Evergreen Valley. Karen's face was on the front page, right next to a headline about possible civil litigation. The HOA website went dark for maintenance. And the new acting board president? Rick. Yep, that Rick. As for me, I didn't sue every homeowner. That was never the goal. But I did file for formal recognition of the full land boundary and a cease and desist order preventing the HOA from accessing any utilities on my property. Karen? Last I heard, she put her house up for sale. Quietly, no open house, just a for sale by owner sign and a whole lot of shame. You know what's funny? After all the shouting, lawsuits, meetings, surveys, and passive-aggressive newsletters, the thing that finally brought peace back to Evergreen Valley was a potluck. Yeah, a good old-fashioned casserole-filled, bring-your-own-chair country potluck. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's talk about justice first. After the town hall meeting where I exposed the truth, the land grab, the manipulation, the recording of Karen planning to squeeze me out, things move fast. The county finalized their boundary review, and guess what? Turns out 9 homes, the dog park, and half the HOA's prized Zen garden were on Cooper family land. Mine. The HOA had 2 choices: tear down their structures or come to the table like adults. They chose the second one. Eventually, my lawyer, a smart woman named Denise who used to play poker with judges, drafted a lease agreement. The HOA could continue using a portion of the land, including the dog park, at fair market rent, indexed annually, with me holding all rights of termination. They signed it. They had no choice. As for the water valve Karen had illegally locked, the county fined the HOA for unauthorized tampering with agricultural infrastructure. Karen personally was barred from holding any board position in any HOA for 7 years under state regulations for ethical misconduct. 7 years. That's like 2 HOA eternities. She resigned officially and finally moved out. A quiet sale to a cash buyer who didn't even know what drama he was inheriting. I wish I could say things went back to normal immediately, but land disputes don't disappear overnight. It took 3 rounds of survey work, 2 court filings, one just to get the HOA to remove a fence they'd claimed was decorative, and several long conversations with scared homeowners who thought I might sue them personally. I didn't. In fact, I went out of my way to reassure people. I told them this was never about revenge. It was about respect, respecting land, history, and neighbors. And once the smoke cleared, you know what happened? People started walking over again. With pies, with questions, with apologies. Rick, now acting president, suggested we hold an open forum on community rebuilding. No boards, no politics, just people sitting in a barn with folding chairs and a pot of coffee, talking about how we can live side by side without turning into a damn courtroom every 6 months. And that's exactly what we did. The ranch started blooming again. Not just literally, though we did plant more trees, and I finally rebuilt Grandpa's old greenhouse, but figuratively. Here's what changed. I opened up the pasture every Saturday morning to local families. Free hay rides, apple picking in the fall, horseback riding for the kids. Rick helped me organize a community garden, this time on legally agreed upon land, with raised beds, compost stations, and shared harvest days. The Zen garden? We left it, but now it's really peaceful. No HOA rules, just a sign that says, take a breath, don't be a Karen. And the old barn? We turned it into a gathering hall. No HOA, no dues, no rules other than, don't be rude, clean up after yourself. One morning I found an old journal of my grandfather's in a drawer in the barn. The page was dated 1963 and it said, if you take care of the land will take care of you, but only if the people respect each other. That's all I ever wanted. Not control, not power, not money. Just the kind of respect that says, you don't get to pave over someone's history. You don't get to bully people into silence because you've got a fancy clipboard. And you definitely don't get to charge a man $250,000 for daring to grow tomatoes on his own soil. The first official evergreen potluck, no Valley Estates anymore, was a thing of beauty. No one wore polos. Someone brought a banjo. There was a brisket that made grown men cry. A 12-year-old girl named Ellie stood up and read a poem as she wrote about the man with the red barn. And I'm not saying I cried, but the wind kicked up a little dust, you know? And not a single person mentioned CC&Rs or mandatory hedging standards. It was, in every sense of the word, peaceful. You know, after everything that happened, the fines, the threats, the locked water valve, the emergency HOA meeting that felt more like a bad episode of Judge Judy, I found myself asking one simple question. How did we get here? How did a peaceful little patch of land passed down through 3 generations turn into a battleground over paint colors, property lines, and unauthorized vegetable plots? The answer, as it turns out, is a lot simpler than you'd think. Karen didn't go after me because she hated tomatoes, or horses, or red barns. She went after me because control makes people feel powerful, and fear makes people easy to control. That's the HOA mentality gone wrong. If it doesn't match, paint over it. If it doesn't comply, fine it. If it won't bow, squeeze until it breaks. But here's the thing no one tells you. Rules only work if they're rooted in fairness. Leadership only works if it's earned, not seized. And community, real community, that only happens when people put ego aside and act like neighbors, not overlords. I had every reason to be angry. I could have burned every bridge, sued half the neighborhood, and gone full old man yells at Cloud. But I didn't, because I remembered what my grandfather taught me under that same old pecan tree where he used to fix tractors. You don't teach people by shouting. You teach them by showing what's right, then standing your ground. So that's what I did. I showed them the maps, the deeds, the truth, and then I stood my ground. Karen forgot something that I hope everyone watching this will remember. A neighborhood is not a business. It's not a battlefield. It's not a brand. And it's definitely not a kingdom with a self-appointed queen. It's a bunch of people with messy lawns, barking dogs, weird hobbies, and loud grandkids, trying to live in peace within a few square miles of each other. You don't need a rule book as thick as the Bible to make that work. You need respect, communication, a little grace, and sometimes a casserole. Now, I've told you mine, but I know a lot of you watching have been through HOA nightmares of your own. Have you ever dealt with a power-hungry Karen, had your mailbox measured, your grass inspected, your front door color reviewed, or maybe, just maybe, you were on the HOA board and you tried to do the right thing but got pushed out by louder voices? I want to hear it. All of it. Leave a comment below and tell me what happened, how you handled it, and most of all, what you'd tell your own HOA if you had 5 minutes and a microphone. Let's make this more than a story. Let's make it a conversation. First of all, thank you. From the bottom of my tomato-growing, fence-patching, paper-collecting heart, thank you for sticking with me through this 6-part saga. If this story made you laugh, grit your teeth, want to print out your land deed just in case, then do me a favor. Click like, subscribe for more real-life stories, and share this with someone who's ever muttered the phrase, "Our HOA's out of control." Because let's be real, every neighborhood has at least one Karen. Let's just make sure they don't get the gavel next time. I'll see you in the next story. Until then, keep your fence solid, your water flowing, and your property lines tight. Mr. Cooper.